Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics breaking down the USports semi-finals. We'll talk about all the action from across USports. Tom was in the house in Wind City. He'll give you all the details of being there for that physical matchup and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing well, my man. It was a great weekend of football. It was a bit heartbreaking in the baseball world, and I'm sure we'll get into that as you rock the Blue Jays hat. I'm sorry that you had to deal with that, my friend. But everything else, I had a blast.
It was a stellar weekend. Some incredible matchups from all the conference semifinals that we'll get into. No top 10 at time of recording. Frankly, at this stage, the top 10 is meaningless to go through. Some of the conferences have their all-stars out. Honestly, go check it out on your own accord for right now. When all four conferences have those out, we will do a bit more of a detail, bit more of a dive into all of that. Can West and RCQ thus far have theirs out. So with no further ado, let's give out our hardware, our metaphorical hardware, and recognize some of the players of the week. Tom, let's start on the offensive side of the ball. The only instance in which we're giving this award to a player on a losing side, because the production this man put up in a single half of football ostensibly was incredible and is going to make for some interesting offseason conversation when we talk about, well, the situation he's currently in. I'm speaking, of course, of one Marshall McRae for the Guelph Griffins. Tom, take us through the day, really the half of football that this young man put together against the reigning Yates Cup champion Laurier Golden Hawks.
Yeah, you mentioned it right there. He came in at half after Tristan Aboud goes out and goes 17 for 26, 272 yards and 3 touchdowns in the air, and then caps that off with 18 rushing attempts for 108 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He has 4 total touchdowns in the second half alone, and Guelph outscores Laurier 30-10. An unbelievable performance by this young man.
You know, we don't do U Sport players of the week, but the comp for him on this weekend is what ELR was doing against Laval in their matchup for McGill, where again, the numbers on the ground and in the air. But again, that's ELR doing what he did in a whole game of football. And some of the similarities, like one of the things that you're always quick to highlight about with quarterbacks, whether they're scrambling athletic quarterbacks, dual threat quarterbacks of the style of Marshall McRae, of ELR, really of Tristan Aboud as well, or just a smart quarterback is when they roll out, when they're moving towards the line of scrimmage, are their eyes still downfield or are they just committed to the run now? And obviously we'll talk about the game. We'll get into some of these magical plays that he had there in nearly pulling off the comeback and the huge upset, is where he still is able to throw that ball running out the line of scrimmage where that defense has to respect his ability to take off. But he can then, with his body kind of twisting like a shortstop trying to get that ball over to first base, just launch a ball downfield. It's going to be interesting when we do the post-mortem breakdown exit meeting interview with the Guelph Griffins to think about the situation they're in right now, because they have two stellar quarterbacks. Anyways, let's move on. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. This game will take us to our other semifinal matchup, the one you were in the house for. Tom, take us through what young Mr. Baldwin was doing for those Queens Golden Gales.
Yeah, an outstanding performance by Queen's defense in total, but in particular, Jacob Baldwin finishes with 11 total tackles, 1 sack, and 1 tackle for loss. He was all over the field. What Coach Beckmanis has him doing, coming or blitzing off the edge or coming up as one of the extra defensive linemen, like all of those things. He played a phenomenal game and finished, obviously, with one of the most impressive stat lines in just 11 tackles in a single game.
And to Windsor's credit, they did not stray away from running the football even when Mambo goes out. And so we obviously know about pace. We obviously know about the guys in that front line. As you've talked about before, Baldwin, someone they'll play at linebacker, they'll bring down onto the line of scrimmage. And really, as we often see at so many levels of football, in so many instances, offensive and defensive, sometimes it's that next guy who has to be the one to have the major game when you know the team on the other side is keying in on your number one. Tom, let's head back to Kitchener-Waterloo for our special teams player of the week. Coming all the way from British Columbia, take us through the day young Dawson Hodge had for his Golden Hawks.
This is the typical kind of performance that we expect from Hodge, but it's always so impressive when you see it in person in a semifinal playoff game. 2 for 2 on his field goals, 4 for 4 on his extra points for 11 points. But the punting, he has 7 punts with 5 of them being inside the 20-yard line for the Guelph Griffins here, pinning them deep and giving them the entire length of the field to go to. That's an outstanding performance, and our special teams player of the week goes to one Dawson Hodge.
And this is probably his draft year if memory serves. And just as to think about the career he's put together, and obviously his time at Laurier is not done as they advance into the Yates Cup that they'll be hosting next week. But like, remember, this is a guy who was an All-Canadian and then has that really just, I don't know what to call it, like year from hell in, I think, 2023 when they go on to lose to Western. And we're having these conversations about how that changes the decision making of the whole team, not just in specials, but on offense as well and defense. And then comes back last year and is on point, is absolutely money, kicking it and punting it as you alluded to. And this year it's been nothing but. So for someone, especially in a realm of football that is so mental, like punting and kicking is, like this guy, the career this guy has had has been nothing but stellar, and almost made that much more because he had that just down year from seemingly out of nowhere. So shout out to Dawson Hodge. Shout out to those Golden Hawks for booking their ticket for their third appearance in the Yates Cup in a row, back-to-back times hosting it. And let's start with that matchup where the Guelph Griffins fell to the Golden Hawks. Final score in this one, Laurier 37, Guelph 30. Tom, like so dang reminiscent in some ways of that week one matchup where Laurier goes up 27-0 in this game. Guelph really can't piece together anything. Laurier's up 14-0, maybe with 5 minutes into this matchup. As you mentioned it, the special teams of Dawson Hodge not only limiting Guelph, but putting Laurier in a position where they're starting in plus field position, on those first couple drives, and then just dicing them up. Aboud's getting a little banged up. They make the switch to McRae in the second half. And like we've seen going back to that Western game early in the year, going back a number of times throughout his career, Marshall McRae just adds a certain element to this offense that brings it to life, brings it some juice, brings it some je ne sais quoi that gets them going, that nearly gets this comeback to happen. Certainly the tale of two halves. Certainly the tale of the Guelph Griffins season being a slow start in the first half and then getting their stuff in gear, whether it's McRae or Aboud in the second half. And another unfortunate sort of tail of the tape for Guelph this season are the bloody penalties that they're racking up. So darn inexcusable. And I think the majority of that conversation probably is going to be served best when we do our end of year breakdown with them. But an electric game nonetheless. McRae has the ball in his hands with the opportunity to drive a whole field to tie it up at the end. Comes a bit short. What did you make of this matchup, watching it after the fact, tracking it from your time at Windsor?
Well, it really just showcased the true heart of both of these teams here. I mean, you see the outstanding offensive explosion from Laurier in the first half and seemingly moving the ball at will. What Cal Wither was doing, he finishes 24 for 33, 369 yards and 2 touchdowns, both of those going to Ryan Hughes, who himself has 9 catches for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. So it was a really just stellar showcase in the air. I do want to give credit to Guelph on stopping the run. Nobody finished over 100 yards, and only Quentin Scott finished over 50 yards rushing the ball. Tayshawn Jackson, who's normally a nightmare to deal with on the ground, is held to just 36 yards rushing. He does have a touchdown on the day, but good job by Guelph in the run defense side. But for everybody who was looking at us, being like, you guys are just homers, you love Guelph, you don't know what you were talking about, the second half of this game is what we expected Guelph to be the entire year. This is the capabilities that they had. That defense was flying around, making big plays, forcing big turnovers against the number one offense in the conference, potentially in USports. And then Marshall McRae, while obviously not having the same rhythm with the receivers, timing was off on a few throws. I think there was one in particular to Harry Vardy where he's doing like a comeback route, and McRae throws it way too early before he's come out of his break, or even close to coming out of his break. He just can't find it, whatever. But seemingly, as somebody who knows ball called me and said themselves, McRae seemed to just strap on the entire Guelph Griffin team and carry them, willingly or not, to close down this game. I mean, we mentioned it before. He had 4 total touchdowns himself, but he doesn't do that on his own. Harry Vardy stepped up huge, 5 catches for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, the second half of this game is where I think both of these, it showcased really well what Guelph could potentially do, but also, the slow start, the penalties that racked up. Like, this is just all a microcosm of the entire season that Guelph had. And to the Guelph supporters, you must be pulling your hair out, because if you had this all year, you definitely wouldn't have finished 3-5, and maybe you host a playoff game and all of that fun stuff. But woulda, shoulda, coulda.
And early on in the game, even with Laurier jumping out to that big lead, it looked like Guelph was committed to running the ball. Smith has a really nice carry early on. He bounces it outside, runs over to the defender. It's the long Yada 29 on the game. Ultimately, Laurier was pretty suffocating on Guelph's run game, save for McRae in his sort of more improvisational work. And again, that piece that we mentioned in talking about giving him the offensive player of the week, where, we mentioned ELR as a comp. Obviously, his older cousin and Trey Ford was the master of this, but of being able to break out of the pocket. And as we know all too well, sometimes that's where you get a couple extra penalties. Not that I saw it on this day, but when, you're blocking for your QB, expect him to be in the pocket, and it turns into a rollout all of a sudden. And, now your guy is breaking out to the right or to the left, and you grab a little bit of that jersey for a bit too long. But this incredible ability to throw on the run while attacking the line of scrimmage, just settling his feet even only briefly, and just throwing a dot. I think it was one of those big plays to Vardy down the field. It might have been for a touchdown, where, again, as a defense, how do you play that? Because if you come downhill too quickly, he'll drop it right over your head. But if you give him too much space, he's already has the ability to just snatch ankles left, right, and center. So now if you're giving him this 10-yard cushion where he can run and operate and break out to the sideline, and of course, as a quarterback, you always have in the back of your mind that the way in which you engage on the tackle is very much a factor of what, penalties might ensue as well. So it's really such an X factor that, at least this year, we obviously have other athletic quarterbacks in the OUA, but really there's no one. Like we'll talk about Domofsky in a bit. We talked about how he has a bit of that dual threat piece there, his athleticism. Some of these quarterbacks can do it, but just like the ability for him to be able to run into space, to be able to still throw these really nice balls downfield. You're absolutely right. Sometimes the rhythm was off a little bit, which is to be expected when, again, like he wasn't the day one starter. He was going in and out all year long with them. But then finding Ethan Garway for that last touchdown and being like, who's this guy? What is what's all this now? So again, it's such an immaculate day by him doing what he was doing. The talent that he has that darn near no one else in this conference can do. On the other side, worth noting, we talked about, November Hughes back in action. And that not only is a nickname that is now validated through, again, that performance he had in last year's Yates Cup, and of course that UTEC Bowl and the terrible, terrible things that he did those Bishop's Gators. But the numbers here, but by the fact that we're now seeing, following their last game against Western, no Ethan Jordan. And we had seen that he looked a little banged up in that matchup. Kind of hearing different things from all different sources, so it's hard to really know what to trust and know what's good or otherwise. But what we do obviously know is that the young man, the presumptive MVP of our league, wasn't in this game, and there's no way Laurier has a low enough opinion of Guelph to think that if he was in any way, shape, or form able to play in this one, that they wouldn't go. That's a major deal to state the least. Like we'll save the specific matchup for what they're gonna have to deal with Queens in that defense. But to talk about what Cal Wither did on this day with Ryan Hughes, with Laomi, some of those other guys, seeing another couple nice plays by Keon Robinson for those Golden Hawks. But the absence of EJ is certainly something that I'm certain, you mentioned Guelph fans pulling their hair out, has Golden Hawk fans, biting their fingernails in reckless nervousness right now of what that might mean to this offense as they proceed into the Yates Cup and hopefully into the USports semifinals and finals, perhaps.
Yeah, with no Ethan Jordan in this lineup, it's a huge loss, but also like there is no replacing an Ethan Jordan. Like he is what we called him, the number one player in the conference, and probably going to work out to be the number one player in U Sports based on what he did in the regular season. But when you've got so many other potential all-stars waiting in the wings with Laurier, like I'm not all that concerned. Ryan Hughes obviously showcases what he's able to do. What Laomi's shown that he can be a phenomenal target as well. He just has to work on the consistency of those hands. But Jackson Stebbings, Jace Atkinson, and then you see these other guys like Keon Robinson. We saw him get his first ever catch against Western, which was a 46-yard touchdown. He finishes with 3 catches for 51 yards. Like, I think the loss of Ethan Jordan, I think that just turns up what Coach Stones Galloway is calling and his ability to play call, because now it's not just a simple crossing route where EJ gets the ball and he's up the field for a touchdown. Now those schemes have to really be dialed in. You have to make sure your receiver routes are crisp, and if you're doing crossing routes, if you've got fades on, if you got whatever else. Not to say that it wasn't already, but even just more so, you can't just expect to get the guy a ball and just watch him do his thing now. You're going to need to do a little bit more, and obviously with what they did here, I think that's exactly what they did.
And for Guelph defensively trying to handle this juggernaut, EJ or no EJ, of an offense for the Golden Hawks, we see Johnny Green back. I can't remember one of their corners got burned pretty bad on one of the Ryan Hughes touchdowns. But Johnny Green back, obviously great for them to have him in the mix. Lafoucault back there at safety, really great stuff for him in this one. But man, and we'd seen him like all year, and again, it's one of those things that we talk about that, especially if you're just watching the streams, it's hard to always see. And even if you're at the game, you have to make a point of watching the defensive back play. But Alex Pope on this day, oftentimes giving up like half a foot, it looked like, of height to a couple of these guys, particularly if it was Ryan Hughes on him. Only credited with one breakup, which I feel is underselling what he did on this day, where, again, a couple of these shots down the field and he's all over these guys. It's obviously a really strong secondary. We were talking with some of the coaches at Western after the Western Laurier game in setting up the Guelph matchup against them and saying how with Western's passing attack struggling, it is going to be a difficult matchup with Guelph because of how good the secondary play is. Obviously, Ryan Hughes gets his in this one. A couple of big plays make up that line to begin with, and Cal's numbers are really strong. But in that second half, especially, and maybe it's a situation where, momentum fosters more momentum on all sides of the ball. And when that offense starts going, gives that defense a little bit of life that, hey, it's reasonable if at half part of you is thinking, oh my God, 27-0. Let's just make sure this doesn't get too embarrassing or whatnot. And now you're thinking, oh, shoot, we actually have a chance here. You get that juice, you get that just bolt of energy, and like a much better job. Obviously, we don't have the numbers breakdown in terms of first, second half, but again, EJ or no EJ, because to your point, it almost allows Stones Galloway to be that much more in his creative bag in terms of getting his guys open. On the whole, yeah, Laurier gets their numbers passing the ball. They're going to do that against anybody, but especially in that second half to give their offense a chance. Because it's one thing if Guelph's just scoring and then Laurier's matching tit for tat, and obviously they do get the major in the third quarter. But Guelph defensively, and again, it's on the one hand, it's nice to be able to see it, nice to be able to talk about, but you say like, well, darn it, why can't we put together 4 quarters of this? But nonetheless, like wanting to applaud that performance when it's able to when we do have it, and especially against an offensive juggernaut like these Golden Hawks.
Yeah, it was truly incredible to see the production from this Guelph Griffin defense. Not to say that they haven't been a great defense all year, but like, you see the effect of what a healthy Javon Jacobson can do in the run game. You see what Nick Parchenko, Robert Keys Wilson, and the rest of that defensive line was doing in just not even necessarily getting into the backfield consistently and doing that, but just not getting blown off the ball, fighting every inch that they possibly could, and making tackles to limit gains. And obviously, we talked about what they were able to do to this rushing attack for Laurier. So, yeah, I really like the defense that we saw from Guelph here. Javon Jacobson finishes with 7 total tackles and a tackle for loss. I mean, nothing really jumps off the page here when you just look at it as itself, but when you watch this game and you see what was going on and how they were operating, it really is incredible what they were able to do. But like, as you mentioned here, we talked about how incredible the offense looked and the defense was solid throughout, but they finish, and I don't even think that this is fully accurate, but they finished with 11 penalties for over 100 yards. And you're like, guys, you cannot keep doing this to yourself. This is always going to bite you in the ass at some point in time during the season, especially in the playoffs here when you're playing against some of the best. I mean, one of them that sticks out to me is it was right after they scored in the fourth quarter. They go to kick a field goal, or sorry, they go to kick an onside kick, and the returner comes down with it. I can't remember who it was. And as he's on the ground, ball is dead, somebody else comes on and like tackles him essentially. Immediate 15-yard penalty. And you're going, guy, like, you're trying to get the ball to get the ball back on an onside kick. If that doesn't happen, you don't want to give them any more yards, especially a team like Laurier that could score immediately. So to do that, instead of having the ball on Laurier's own like 40-yard line, they get the ball at over half in Guelph territory, and you're thinking like you can't do that kind of stuff.
And they get, I don't want to say bailed out, but as you mentioned, great job by the Guelph defense in slowing down the run. Laurier hands it off on the first one, and in classic Galloway fashion, next play actions, takes a shot to Ryan Hughes. They get the breakup. So they only burn one of their 2 timeouts to begin with, a great Dawson Hodge punt, and McRae starting within their own 10. Like, I don't know who the young man is, and we normally don't call out guys for doing this, but that is a moment where it's like that is, I'm talking about misremembering names. There was a guy on Laurier, I forget if it was last year, 2 years ago, who had some just like boneheaded special teams penalties running downfield and just trying to get some get back at a guy who probably got him earlier. And again, not our usual tendency, but stuff like that where it's like, that is just absolute selfish football. And if I knew the guy's name in this case, frankly, unless it was my guy Kanye, but I know it wasn't Kanye because I did see him on the hands team, but he was on the other side of it. And again, Kanye, I love you, but you're not the guy I want, jumping up to try and, swat a ball out of bounds to get the ball back. I know he's got some bunnies on him, but anyways, like it's selfish BS football. And again, stuff that we'll have to talk about when we get to the, post-mortem on the team, because that's been a tendency for them all year. And at the end of the day, they're able to march the ball to about half. So you add those 15 yards on. At the end of the day, I don't think it's a make or break on it. It's a testament to part of just the frustration of the year for this club. And it's things where it's like, hey, it's one thing when Donovan Malloy's out with injury for most of the year, when Caleb Sargent's out, when Schretchinger misses the first half, pretty much the first half, middle of the year, when Ethan Pyle's been out, when Johnny Green's been missing time, when all these guys have been injured, your quarterbacks get injured. It's one thing to say, well, bloody heck, when we talk to the number of people like, what's going on with Guelph? And part of us just goes, part of it is they've just been so dang injured. Stuff like that is just inexcusable. And, hey, Coach Soria, I don't know, like at a certain point, that's got to be like, that does have to be something that falls onto you. I'm certain he's not condoning it or whatever, but like, I don't know. It's just it's frustrating to say the least. I know there was another point I wanted to mention, but you bringing up that moment kind of got me off the rails. I want to talk about Laurier defensively. Sorry. We see the return of Josh Connors. the
Oh,
right or left hand, I forget, all, clubbed up, that thing looking like a freaking, turkey leg on steroids. And he's making big plays for them. Obviously, Grigorsic making big plays, getting into the backfield, slowing down that run game. But really, as we always see with this club, that's secondary by them, whether it's Jahari Hastings, and Hastings got beat on one of the touchdowns pretty bad where the guy slipped behind him. But nonetheless, he was consistent as all heck. Paul Legale, who stepped up big for them this year with Dollywall being out, but Malik Cote, as always. And we talked about how the way that Guelph was able to chunk the ball down the field against Western and just dump it off to Smith or just try and get some of these shorter passing concepts when they're not able to push it down to those deep shots or even medium shots down the field. And they had a couple of those nice ones over the middle to some of their guys like Vardy on the day on some of those deep dig routes. But Malik Cote, as always, where he's able, like you're able to play deep umbrella and come downhill when you have DBs like Cote that are sure tacklers. And, there's a lot of just jokes that get made at the behest of defensive backs of like, well, you got two left hands out there. That's why you play DB, not receiver. In the case of Cote, it kind of is the case because he only, what is it? He never caught it. He got the one interception in his career and barely got any in practice as well. And sometimes the joke as well is that they don't want to get in the box and they're kind of a bit more of those timid players, whatever. It's a hard hitting defensive secondary for these Golden Hawks. And it's why you can just trust them to rally downhill the ball and they're not going to give up any extra yardage than they already have to. So limit the big plays and just that. We talk about Western for years, is that kind of bend but don't break defense. And it starts by having strong defensive secondary players who can tackle with the best of them. And, you add in Wilkins Flaherty and his ability to move sideline to sideline, which was so paramount in slowing down to any degree what Marshall McRae could do on this day. So again, hats off to that defense by Laurier, even when Guelph was moving the ball, still making big timely plays to be able to limit some of the success of them.
yeah, that defense was incredible. Ethan Grigorsic, in particular, for me, 5.5 tackles, 2 for loss. He just looks so natural when he's in that middle linebacker spot. He's incredible. Josh Connors, he only finishes with 4 total tackles, but it felt like the tackles that he made were in such big moments, including one of the last. He gets a sack on Marshall McRae during that time when they get the ball back with like 50 seconds left in the game, kind of thing. Like that's huge. It's so unbelievably difficult to sack a guy like McRae because of how athletic he is, but to get home on there, I think Amari Hastings was in there too, but that was amazing. One other guy that really impressed me on this defense was Joseph Edlington. He has been injured a little bit in this season here. He finished with 1.5 tackles, but a big sack in this game as well, and was really just causing havocs for that Guelph Griffin offensive line that, again, has been banged up and dealing with some injuries. But I really liked his play here. I think he adds another level to this Laurier defense. He did go down with an injury at one point. I can't remember if he came back in the game. I'm pretty sure he did. But yeah, this defense getting healthier with Connors back in the mix. If he's going to play with the rest of that club the rest of the year, you don't have to worry on if that's going to affect his play because obviously, like we said, he's been playing pretty well here. So this is a Laurier team that looked really impressive. Obviously, 27-0 and a half is something to hang your hat on. But I'm looking myself in the mirror here and saying, hey, we got to clean some stuff up here because, 30 points in one half, despite, hey, Marshall McRae is an unbelievable talent and he causes so many issues. One of the aspects that I wanted to add in on McRae in particular is when he's taking off and running previously, he's just looking for a gap and he's making guys miss and he's going. There was a few times in this game where you see him take off and escape the pocket, but he's still has his eyes downfield. And if there's one quarterback that will force you to come up to try to tackle him, it's McRae. And if he continues on into next year, again, we'll get into this when we do the postmortems, but the idea of him on the run and saying, yeah, pick your poison. If you come up to me, I'm just going to dump it over top of you. If you don't, I'm going to scamper and potentially burn everybody on my way to the end zone here. But I think if you're Laurier, regardless how much you win by or not, I know the quality of this coaching staff. They're in those meeting rooms, in the film rooms being like, we got some stuff to clean up. But there's obviously we think the world that these Golden Hawks, they're the number one team in the country for a reason, and they look really good right now.
And speaking of a banged up Guelph O-line, I believe it was Tommy Barakis we saw leave at some point for them in the game. And I don't remember if he returned, but you're already shorthanded against a great front seven for Laurier. So the fact that they still were able to hold in tough to the best of their ability, again, shout out to our guy and Coach McDonald, making sure that they have a plethora of guys that they can fill in. But nonetheless, we'll talk more about Guelph when we get into the off season. The Laurier Golden Hawks will be taking on the Queens Golden Gales in the Yates Cup next week. And let's talk about Queens' journey to the Kitchener-Waterloo region for the Yates Cup as they rolled into Windsor, Ontario at the end of the 401, mind you, under the shadow of the Golden Arches. Some people call it Little Rock, Arkansas. With the bluest of blue colors, the goldest of gold swaggers, and took out those Lancers 34-21. Certainly a closer affair than that score dictates. And a game, Tom, that you were in the house for, that again, if not for my own just sort of being run a little bit ragged with the throes of the teaching and coaching year sort of pinnacling, if you will, I would have been there right with you. And we'll get to your experiences, but a game that lived up to pretty darn well what we would have expected from these two teams. And again, we saw them, 2-3 weeks ago, so we were familiar. What's the Shaq meme up? It's the opposite of the Shaq meme. We are familiar with your game, and we saw them play each other twice last year as well. There's no love lost between these two clubs when they come to the ballpark, and it was a physical, at times almost chippy definitely chippy to the point of like really pushing it matchup between these clubs. Great effort by both sides. Queens comes out on top. Tom, what are your first impressions being there in the house at Alumni Stadium for this bloodbath of an OUA semifinal game?
The best way that I can describe what this game was like, this was a high-scoring rock fight. That's what it was. Like,
that's a
normally
great line.
When you say it's a rock fight, it means like the final score is like a 9-3 kind of outing when it's just field goals. But man, you had everything that you were hoping for in a game. You had great touchdowns, you had phenomenal defense, huge big plays, and a crowd that I would say, and I said this at the stadium to a bunch of people, there is no greater home field advantage, because whether you think rightly or wrongly, that crowd for Windsor was antagonistic to all hell. They were going after those Queens Golden Gales players and doing things. I mentioned this to you previously, but doing things like as the offensive line's coming over, they'll pick out one of the numbers. Hey, 74, why don't you sit down? And as he sat down, the entire stadium, or at least a big chunk, went, good boy, as if he's a dog. And man, if that don't get you boiling, that'll fire you up. But whether or not you agree with the antagonizing and, how that happens, one of the biggest features that those guys did, there's people in the stands. I think there were some of the non-dressers from some other sports that are in there, but they obviously understand the game. And one of the things that we find when we go out, like Panda Game is a great example, there are people who are loud and cheering for their teams, but there's times where you need fans to be quiet, and there's times where you need them to be loud. And sometimes, fans can get really excited when their team has the ball. And you're like, no, like, this is the time to be silent. You need them to be able to talk. But with the fans in the fans in the stands for Windsor, because they understood the game, they're starting up chants as Queens is breaking the huddle, getting up to the line where you want them to be loud, and the rest of the Windsor faithful, the fans in there, are joining in, so that place can get pretty loud as it's happening, and that's really where you saw a great feeling. Once again, that stadium doesn't hold a whole lot. There's probably, if I had to guess, 3.5, maybe 4,000 people there, but loud and going after these Queens Gales. A few of them turned around, the Gales players, that is, turned around and had some words to the audience. And the moment that happens, you've got them, you've won. So it was a wild atmosphere even before the ball was kicked off.
And again, egg on my face, whatever you want to call it, for having not been in the house yet for one of those games, nor have I been out to Quebec City to see what it's like in Laval. But, and shout out to, who I'll pull up the profile maybe later, whoever it is that posts all these Laval games on YouTube. Like, again, big love for you, Madame or Monsieur. Where that place gets rocking, and again, smart football fans, exactly as you described it. So that's where my mind goes right away, and I don't think there's a higher compliment you could pay to a fan base than to even make a comparison. And maybe I'm out of my tree for even insinuating it might be comparable to Quebec City. I haven't been in the house for either places, but that's sort of like the impression I get by the way you paint that picture. Now, in terms of the matchup itself, a game where these part of that chippiness, again, teams that have, it's the fourth matchup in 2 years, twice playoff games, and in this current iteration of these teams, the fact that they've played each other in such proximity certainly adds in a lot of that bad blood. But as well, teams that stylistically are so similar in terms of establishing their offense on the ground, hard-nosed defenses that are going to hit you and hit you hard. And Jared Kasari, in the third or fourth quarter, I forget when it is, when he breaks that 60-yard touchdown, where that really felt like that the turning point of the game. And obviously, we'll talk about more specifically the run game for Windsor. And my heart just broke when seeing Wavy Mambo leave at the end of the first half, and then hearing Brett Hedges on the call mentioned that it was a broken collarbone. And also, by the way, awesome getting him and Coach Demore on the call again. And I know you got to speak with Coach Demore, and I want you to talk about that experience. But, Kasari on the day, 16 carries, 161, the 2 touchdowns. That major touchdown of 60 yards obviously boosts that number a little bit. This Windsor defense, like, my goodness, like, there was the part of me with how banged up with Mambo obviously going out, with seeing Domofsky getting a little banged up, with a part of me even picking Windsor to win this game. Partly through the third quarter, I'm like, I kind of want to see Queens win, just because I think at this point, with how hurt Windsor is, they're going to give Laurier the better matchup. Lo and behold, did I know that it almost was going to be a Guelph team having to go on the road against one of these teams. But that defense stayed true start to finish. And yes, that's a higher rushing number than you normally get against Windsor, but it's so bolstered by that one rush by Kasari, not to take away from the young man. He's obviously one of the best we have in the country. And that's just to feed into this kind of take I'm trying to make. It's not even a take. It's the coldest take you could possibly make, that Windsor plays great defense, and stopping the run as their sort of bread and butter was so incredible to see early on in this game.
Oh my goodness, the way that these guys played and the heart that is on this Windsor team. You can't measure that. There's no way to really call that out, but like, you saw Wavy Mumbo go down with an injury. He went down with an injury a few times before that happened, and he stays down. He has to get carried off, or he's taken off by the trainers, and he immediately comes back in as soon as he can. And all of these guys are just ready and chomping at the bit. Like, they embody that blue collar gold swagger moniker of just wanting to go to work, dudes with their lunch pails going to the construction site, and we just got to get this thing done. Now, I will say that Windsor offensive line played a really great game of football. They are nasty as all hell. You hate going up against them. Eric Johnston had himself a whale of a time, but he got his, that's for sure. But I really liked what I saw from these guys. They were moving bodies. They were playing right to the whistle, maybe a few times after the whistle too, but they were impressive. And the thing that I want to point out the most, obviously both of these offensive lines for Queens and Windsor, really outstanding. We've mentioned a number of their names a few times. But in terms of the smarts, the athletics, whatever you want to call it, not necessarily the blazing speed, but the ability to set up blocks from both running back groups that we saw in this game was unbelievable. What we saw specifically with Windsor, they're doing a counter play, or they're doing a power play where you've got an offensive lineman that's pulling across. Instead of immediately cutting up right after your old lineman's pulled with great linebackers, we mentioned Baldwin, obviously Pace being back in this, what Talbot, Delaney, and Mambo all did is they really followed where the pulling line, the guard was going, almost as if they were going to bounce it outside to get that Queens defense flowing and then cut back in as those blockers are setting up and then knifing up the field to get an 8, 10, 11 yard gain. It was really incredible to watch them set up blocks and make themselves that much harder to tackle as you've got hulking offensive linemen coming across the field to take dudes out. And the same thing with Kasari. He does such a great job picking his way through the line of scrimmage and through some of these great defenders, especially near the end of the game. He knows when do I have to try to dodge somebody, maybe break out into another gap, and then immediately hand goes up, two hands on the football, puts his head down, and whoever's tackling them has got to have a world of hurt coming at him as well. This was two running back groups that were playing almost chess on the field with how they were running the ball and setting things up. And I love the fact that I got the chance to see that because, my goodness, this was impressive as all hell.
And I'm going to go ahead and assume that the 60-yard touchdown is probably Kasari's second longest because he had that major run against Waterloo, I think, earlier in the year that was at least 70, maybe into the 80-yard territory where he breaks it on the sideline. And because of how big he is, how hard he runs, you've always talked about the vision he shows, from a coaching standpoint, the way he keeps his shoulders square and being able to sort of jump cut or just feel his way through those gaps without committing himself overly to one sort of plane of movement, if you will. But then when he gets into the open field, I always just, for some reason, just because of all those other things, how between his size, how hard he hits, and how he just, he reminds me of Rob Farquharson a little bit as a true zone runner. And but then when he gets an open field, I couldn't believe no one caught him. And that's not, again, just partly saying that I don't think he's fast or don't know he's fast, but I'm also thinking about, wait, so you're telling me that Estefano Cibodazzi is not going to catch you? Ethan John's not going to catch you? And I mean, the day Ethan John had, holy smokes. Robert Springer's not going to catch you? Piccioni, Dylan Simpson, none of these guys could get him. It's such a remarkable thing when he breaks through, and it's that classic, we're talking about how these two teams are very similar in their approach to the game, and in a very oversimplified way of understanding both these teams and frankly as a whole OUA football, but it's also perhaps a very accurate way of doing it, which is just the Western Mustangification of OUA football, which we always talk about, where at a certain point the dam is going to break open. And they're just going to lean on you, and then that running back is going to break it big. How many times we've seen that over the years with the host of running backs that Western puts out. I can't believe Western's not playing a game this week, and I'm already talking about them already. Bad job by me. I'm so sorry to these fan bases. Wow. To Queens, Windsor, my bad. I scrub that out. I might have to actually edit that out. But that part alone, where he just has this ability to, again, run guys over, get those chunk yardages, and with my guy Coach Nez, and I know you got to see him afterwards a little bit, of just that trust in the game plan, right? Of not just saying that, well, we're getting yardage, but maybe that's not the move for us right now. They didn't really seem to use some of those run to screen looks that we'd seen them use in previous weeks. They're getting a few balls out well. On the day, Vreeken has a good day, 17 for 25, 217, the 2 touchdowns, no picks. That's an efficient day for him. Did what he needed to get done in this matchup. But then still knowing that that Kasari is gonna still be able to break it big when it matters most, is just so impressive to watch. And the thing about this time of the year, we talked about it a little bit. Actually, sorry, I think we talked about it in setting up the classic pod before the pod, and talking about some of the players in Can West and being like, shoot, is this the last time we're seeing so-and-so don the colors of such and such a team? In what undoubtedly is Kasari's last ride with these Golden Gales, I certainly don't want to take it for granted. And we can certainly say the same thing about number 23, Ethan John and Springer and those other guys in the secondary for Windsor. But I'll said a lot all there with maybe not saying all that much. Kasari, what a day he had, though.
Yeah, he's a different animal, especially when you see how he's able to read and what he does when he sees a gap. That 60-yard run, it was a blitz into that. I think it was a seven-man blitz. And as you and I have talked about before, we actually really love that because linebackers are coming up to us, makes our job that much easier. And once you get a crease, there's nobody back in the end of it. So he gets that crease, and because it's a seven man, you've got safety who's over on the three-man side. You've got your two half and your corners on the two-man side with nobody in the middle. And Kasari, when he sees the gap, his ability to seemingly take one step and be at full speed and then just be gone. And by the time you recognize that he's going, he's already hitting that top notch speed. That's what makes it so difficult to try to come back at him here. He just looked so impressive with what he was able to do in this game. I mean, what they asked from him and what he's able to provide in that Queens offensive line in the run game in particular did well. I think Braxton Johnson is a load to manage, and the way that Coach Nez got around that, he called up a number of draw plays. A few times they got him for big yards and big gains. I would have liked it to have seen it a little bit less. It felt like at times what Windsor was doing was they were changing the way that they were rushing, and I think for the most part, this is the way that those specifically those ends have been doing things where they don't just rush around the tackles to try to get to the quarterback. What they do is they do the speed to power that you and I have both seen, where they're setting up an offensive lineman like Nick Henning and Jazz Kyra. And when you're doing that, you have the tendency as an offensive line to raise up because you're just trying to get back as fast as you can. And then in that, while your momentum's going back to try to keep up with his speed, to have Hoskins and Ahmad Taylor turn and then go into a bull rush right afterwards, that's where a lot of those issues were being caused by both of these guys and how they're so good at rushing the passer. And what that does is, A, that gets your offensive linemen on their heels, and that means that you're getting in, but you're not going around them. You are compressing the pocket. So Vrikin doesn't really have anywhere to go. And that's why those draw plays, a few of those times after, the third or fourth time that it happened, you didn't see a whole lot of yards gained because the entire Windsor defensive line is just closing things in. So there are no gaps for you to really find. Now, I think what was the most effective, where there was a couple of times where Vrikin himself did a quarterback draw. And I think you and I were talking about this before. Some of the runs that he has is just really incredible in key moments, fighting for extra yards and going up. I mean, starting off at the beginning of the year with that overtime performance where he rushes it in himself to go up a score on the Western Mustangs. Like he has the ability to take off and run, and he does it really effectively. I was even thinking to myself, I would love to see him in like a roll situation where he's has the ability to throw the ball. And worst case, if he doesn't find anybody, he can take off and run because he is deceptively pretty good at that. But a great job by this run game in general. Coach Nez called up a great one, but that's a hell of a Windsor defense to try to call against. And Coach Donovan at times just seemed like he called the perfect defense into a lot of these plays.
It's certainly a great matchup to say the least, as was, again, the matchup of the Windsor Lancers offensively against Coach Beckmanis's defense. And, again, Domofsky, we're playing around with maybe doing an end of year top 55 as well to kind of see where guys finished off their season based on where they started. And Domofsky is an interesting case study to kind of think about where we had him going into the year. I don't believe we had him on the list of memory serves, and kind of coming out of the season, I don't know if we'll have him on. It'll be an interesting conversation. We obviously talked about the running backs, and you highlighted it so well in classic Windsor fashion, a stable of running backs, a running attack, not just one guy in specific. And in large part, it started off as the Wavy Mambo show this year, and that was in large part because of injury, with our guy in Talbot being out for the first, missing so much time last year and then the start of the year this year, Delaney being banged up, kind of getting the closest semblance of the true potential of this running attack for Windsor, which is what makes it so heart-crushing, heartbreaking. to see Mambo go out. But wherever sort of tier you put Domofsky in ranking quarterbacks, the talent he has around him of Kareem Cotton and Colby Ginn and Mateo Trifon at tight end, and even Evan Martin, a guy that we probably didn't talk enough about this year, Tyreek Quason with that track speed that he has, a really nice matchup going up against these DBs where it's kind of, obviously those DBs are as good a group as you can have. But it's an interesting element when you're in large part, you're going to say, well, we're just going to hit you with a lot of speed and see how you can adjust to it. And frankly, they held their own on the day. The passing attack really didn't open up all that much for them. Queens as well, Falcone has a really nice ending to the game for them. And Logan Walton has the other touchdown for them. But overall, these secondaries did a really strong job of limiting what these quarterbacks were able to do. But just this Queens secondary, and again, partly why I kind of invoked it in bringing up Ethan Jordan being injured in our last conversation about their semifinal game against Guelph, is like, this is such a no fly zone is like an understatement to talk about how good these guys have been. And it was almost fitting that, whether you could, maybe it was too early in the game to say the Kasari run for touchdown, 60-yard run for a touchdown was the nail that sealed the nail in the coffin or what have you. Maybe that was too early to call, but our guy in Ashton Miller-Melanson with that interception certainly kind of felt like that statement moment that, like, classic Vince Carter 2000 dunk contest style. It's over. It's over, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's hard to say more good things about that secondary that we already have said. But again, against whether the quarterback matches what that passing attack can have, a really strong receiving core that adds an element of speed that few teams can match. And Queens was, to no surprise, still up for that challenge.
Yeah, I mean, part of me, well, you see the stats on the day for both of these quarterbacks, in Foles and in Domofsky, and obviously you need that to be much better if you're going up against a team like Queens. But the other side of this is that's just a really good Queens secondary. I mean, there's a couple of times Josh Foles gets in there, and credit to him, Domofsky goes out with an injury near in the second quarter, and he comes in and he doesn't blink. Like, he just goes in there because he's got a job to do and does pretty well. And he tries to find a ball to Colby Ginn. Fortunately, it's a little bit underthrown, but like, even if it was properly thrown, Keegan Vanek is just all over him, and he gets the knockdown there, and it's just great work by these guys. And Ashton Melanson, there's a couple of times where he has breakups, and he looks just really good as he's doing things. This is one of the most difficult secondaries to throw on and to do it consistently here. And when you look at the production that this defense has consistently here, it's just incredible to see. I think that I would have loved to have seen a little bit more from this passing game, and I think at the end of the day, that's really what Windsor's kind of Achilles heel is. I mean, you've got one of the best kickers in Brady Lidster. You've got a phenomenal defense from top to bottom. Your offensive line looks great. Your running backs, your receivers. I want to see more from Domofsky. We've been saying it all year long. We want to see more. We want to see more. And eventually, at a certain time, that's going to start to creep up with you. And according to this, I don't know if this is right. The stats out of Windsor at times can be a little off. But according to this, 7 for 16, 62 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 interception. That doesn't seem right, but I don't think his real stat line, even if that's wrong, is that much better. So it's a difficult pill to swallow for the Windsor Lancer fans, but I think this is kind of reminiscent on the number of phenomenal teams that they've had. The quarterback play, I think, right now is what's limiting Windsor.
It's unfortunately a familiar story with how this Windsor team has been under Coach Cercelli for these past 6 years, whatever it's been at this stage. Sometime their own undoing when they rotate their quarterbacks in a ton. But nonetheless, like, what a great year for Windsor. Losing Joey Zorn, losing Christopher John, losing Kaladia Musin, losing Devin Verisuk, Maceo Christmas, Trey Ranson. I'm forgetting one of the other young linebackers that they had in there, Jason Rashotzi. And they say, guess what? Our defense is still going to be one of the top in the province. Guess what? Our rushing attack is still going to be one of the best in the province. Guess what? Our passing attack is still going to leave you wanting a little bit more, but we're going to scare the pants off every team that has to come into our house, and no one wants us to go on the road. Doggone it. I mean, if you have more comments, obviously being there in the house, I'll leave it to you. But as always, unfortunately, is the case as we've seen, because we're always having to say salute to you, Windsor, for the year you put on. And we'll talk about you in the offseason because it's been a minute since they've made it to the Yates Cup. Awesome job by them this year. The adversity of the travel toward the end of the year and them not only not blinking at it, but coming out undefeated on that 2-week road trip to Ottawa and Queens back to back, and then taking out Ottawa and nearly doing it to Queens as well to then go to the Yates Cup. Huge job by them, and but nonetheless sets up a gargantuan matchup for the Yates Cup, which obviously we'll save for the Yates Cup preview podcast. But doggone it. Talk about good matchups between, Queens and Windsor. Holy smokes, brother. Queens and Laurier. I'm so excited to talk about that later in the week. Final thoughts to you, Tom. Anything or everything from this semifinal matchup?
Yeah, a few things that I want to bring up. I mean, first and foremost, to do a goal line setting or a short yardage setting where you've got Kareem Cotton as your quarterback, as he played quarterback previously, and they do that fun little spin to get into position there, and it turns into a triple option play. Shout out to offensive coordinator Joe Cercelli for coming up with something like that, because I think it was really effective. But there's a few plays that stick out in my mind when you start thinking on some of the turning points in here. I think one of them early on in the first quarter, I think it's Windsor's first time that they're punting the ball, and Coach Taggart dials up the punt block and gets home. And that's what leads to the first initial score for Queens. And you're thinking, man, like, that's an incredible time to pull that off. And, a number of times where there's holding penalties that are called or certain things that are happening, and then you see Queens just come out with something. I think it was in the third quarter, if I remember correctly, Vreekin connects on a big pass and completion. They move the ball in a chunk. I think it was a 30-yard gain. And then the 48-yard touchdown pass immediately afterwards for a 2-play score. Right after Windsor had some great momentum. There was so many times where you think Windsor has the time to put this away. And then Queens comes up with a big play. One of my favorites that I saw that in the grand scheme of things doesn't really matter all that much, but it's a goal line play near the end of the first half where Andrew Delaney has the ball and he's coming up the field, and Pace comes in, and this perfect form tackle where Delaney is a big, strong running back and Pace is obviously that dude as well. And they hit, and it was perfect because neither of them get blown back. They just kind of fall on the spot where they are. Like unstoppable force meets the immovable object type deal. And it was just such a great kind of analogy for that. But to see Pace back in the fold and not looking like he skipped the beat with that big tackle, and then to see Windsor's roar back and getting to the end zone, like, this was, like I mentioned, a high-scoring rock fight, and was one of the best games that I had a chance of to seeing live. And I have to say, one of the most impressive victories for this Queens coaching staff. The way that the guys did not falter at all. They continued to do their thing. Windsor at times, they struggled with penalties at times and getting into that chippiness and that nastiness and just playing that gritty football that Windsor does. And Queens, for the most part, not getting into it, staying out of it, playing clean. That, I think their motto this year is smart, disciplined football, and that's exactly what they did in this one. So this was a very impressive win. Kasari did go out with an injury for a little bit. Obviously was able to come back in and finish this game. Eric Johnson, like I mentioned, went down and then came back after taping up his ankle and getting a massive sack in the fourth quarter to almost close the game out. But there was a lot of grit and a lot of things that I really liked about this Queens team. Shout out to Windsor. Again, I cannot thank you enough for all of the Windsor faithful that listen to us on the podcast. I got to see the Piccionis again. What a lovely family. They are just phenomenal people. And everybody else that made the effort to come up and say hi to me when I was there. I appreciate you. You are incredible. And I promise next year I will get Zach down so that we can watch a game in person in Wind City.
Yeah, 1000% bad job by me this year. I don't know what to chalk that one up to. Tom, Queens, Laurier rematch from week 2, week 3, whatever week it was. I can't wait for that one. We're still working out the details of some form of a game day live that we'll be doing by the time we do our conference championship preview. I think that'll probably be the title of the podcast, since we now cover all the leagues pretty equally. Definitely not equally, but in our attempt to cover all the leagues equally, should probably have more info on that. So keep your eyes peeled for that. One way or another, we will see you in Kitchener-Waterloo. Tom, let's take our talents out to Can West. More specifically, let's head out to the prairies, to the beautiful province of Saskatchewan, and let's start with the game out from Saskatoon, where still no Anton Ammanrud for those Huskies. But doggone it, they did not skip a beat in this one. Final score, Saskatchewan 26, UBC 7. And, this Saskatchewan defense has been real deal. We've talked about your boy and Seth Hundaby obviously being accented so well by nice to see our guy in Anesu Latmore not only get, I think it was maybe one of his only interceptions. First interception of the year was in garbage time. They mentioned on the broadcast, I couldn't recall. Also picks up an all-star bid in the process. So shout out to you, Latmore. But Jacob Goldstone in the middle as well with Hundaby. Such a fearsome front seven for them. And just this UBC team where we were talking about that, it's a situation where they're going to have to go tit for tat scoring with Saskatchewan. And from what we saw from Viotto over the year, and there's a bit on and off throughout the season, but specifically last week in that immaculate outing that he had ending the regular season off, that, you might say that between Jake Farrell and Viotto right now, Viotto might be the hotter quarterback. Couldn't get it done against this Huskies offense. You had a touchdown in garbage time to make it look somewhat respectable, but this was all Huskies from the jump.
Yeah, this was an incredible showcase for the Saskatchewan Huskies, that defense in particular. You already mentioned off a number of those names. The D-line as well. I mean, they've got a couple of all-stars in there for a reason. Charlie Parks and Reese McCormick really look impressive here, but the guy that I want to shout out, and I want to get to, and I know that you're obviously going to get to there, but, I think one Mr. Riker Frank listening to the podcast going, you know what? There's a lot of talk about one Marshall Erickson and Christian Katende. You know what? The buck stops at the best running back in Can West with Frank.
Is that what Riker Frank sounds like?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Somehow a weird mix between a New York accent and just a meathead. Yeah, it's really strange. But if you talk to him, you'll hear it. 30 attempts. 192 yards on the ground. He doesn't get into the end zone, but man, when you look at an impressive outing and you look at 192 yards, his long of the day was 24. So those are chunk yardage over and over and over again. And a Saskatchewan offensive line that doesn't have a single Can West All-Star that I know has got to be pissed off at that and flex their muscles against a great UBC defense. Our guy, again, in Kinsale Phillip, 11 tackles on the day. What a stud that guy is at that will linebacker spot. But man, what Riker Frank and that offensive line did on the ground was impressive as all hell.
100%. It shouldn't be understated. It shouldn't be the back page news by any means. But we're getting to the stage right now where, Farrell, to his credit, 16 for 21, 260 in the air, 2 touchdowns, the 1 interception. Obviously hooking up with your guy and Daniel Weeb in the end zone. Beautiful for 55 yards. Like, fellas, he couldn't have drawn up any better. And just a beautiful strike over the middle, over the head of the 2 defenders. I don't know if it was a cover 2 look, whatever it was, where we're kind of getting to that territory now. And, again, I know we said we'll talk about the All-Stars when they all come out. We've already sort of spoiled a few of them. Anton Ammanrud still awarded him along with Jackson Tuchinski, which brought up an interesting conversation we had that I think in totality we'll wait to talk about when we do a more thorough deep dive on the All-Stars. But, Anton's still listed as, in the the 5 games he plays, still considered strong enough in his outing to be awarded the Can West All-Star. But we're getting to a point now where with what Farrell's doing, and, we'll talk about Regina just eking out the victory against Manitoba in a moment, and a great defense there. If you're Saskatchewan, you're in an interesting position, and no doubt, Coach Nias being very intimately connected with both these quarterbacks, because you had heard some word that Anton might have been back for this matchup. Now all of a sudden, the rematch of the Battle of Saskatchewan for the Hardy Cup, like, what percentage of Anton Ammanrud healthy do you take, or like how? I would imagine if he's 100%, which no one's 100% at this point in the year, but like it's getting to a point where the rhythm that Farrell's had, like one of the Can West MVP arguments we've been making for Weeb is that he's been able to do it with Anton now, obviously, but he's obviously able to do it with Farrell. Credit has to go to Farrell as well for being able to like still get him the ball and get him these looks. 6 catches, 131, the touchdown of 55 yards. It's no doubt it's a great day for the Huskies out there, but no doubt a lot of conversation of what do you do at this point where they've been riding this hot streak with Farrell at the helm. He's looking pretty strong in there. But if you have your Can West All-Star quarterback maybe at 80%, do you just pull the trigger on it and say, get him back in there? Like, this is in some ways it's a spoil of riches, I guess. But as the saying goes, when you have 2 quarterbacks, you really have no quarterbacks in some regard.
Yeah, to me, if both quarterbacks are completely 100% healthy, it's Anton Ammanrud all day. But you raise a very interesting point where does a 70% Ammanrud give you a better chance than 100% Jake Farrell? Does an 80%? What does that look like? And if there's one guy that I have total confidence in making that decision, it's going to be Mason Nias. And I know that he, along with head coach Scott Flory, have been looking at this. And the word that I received was a number of weeks ago when Saskatchewan played against UBC in UBC that midway through the week, Anton Ammanrud was listed as a maybe to dress in this game. So if there's a potential that he could be back, and I don't think you're going up against a UBC squad that, yes, obviously struggled the 2 times that they played against Saskatchewan, but it still shows a lot of promise in what they're able to do, and especially if Drew Viotto's operating at on all cylinders. He looks really impressive. So I don't think they would have just kept him out for this game. But if you can get him back in time for this game, man, this is going to be a huge matchup in the Hardy Cup here. And I think that Anton, especially with how he has been playing, let's not forget this is an Anton Ammanrud that for the past couple of years was the gunslinger, because he was throwing the ball up and they were beautiful, but at times he is forcing it into tight windows. He's getting intercepted and can be the reason why they're winning and also the reason why they're losing with that kind of mentality. This past year, although he's only played in 5 games, he hasn't thrown a single interception, and he looks phenomenal while he's there. If he can get healthy in time for the Hardy Cup, Saskatchewan has a chance to make a real serious run for a Vanier this year. I'm going to say that right now.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. It's an interesting position to be in, and like as you highlighted, at the end of the day, they can hand it off to Frank and know that they can win themselves a game. Seemingly, either of these quarterbacks have just has that just gravity to be able to pull in the ball from any which way. But at the end of the day, as well, the defense this team is playing right now, like the fact that they can on the back of Frank and this defense alone probably win themselves a Hardy Cup and maybe even go further, that they've bought themselves the time to be able to, to solve that problem, if it even is a problem. You are definitely right that obviously if Anton is fully ready to go, that you go with him. But it's that piece on like, well, if it's a couple weeks ago, he's a maybe, like that means he's close to 100. Are they just waiting for him to be 100? who knows? Maybe the same way, like we kind of invoked that idea of like if EJ was fully like ready to go in some capacity against Guelph, is Laurier really not going to put him in against Guelph in that matchup? Like again, I don't think we think that that's what they would be going with. Does Saskatchewan have that opinion of UBC that look, we can just beat these guys with hand the ball off to Frank and just our defense playing great and Farrell doing what he's doing? Clearly it bared out that that was the case, and with gusto. Viotto hooking up with McBean though in the end of the game, garbage time though it was certainly one of the highlights of the USports weekend though.
Oh my goodness, what an incredible catch by Shamar McBean. I believe it was that 29-yard that he's listed with as the long, but over top of the defender, high pointing the ball, coming down with it. That just showcases why he was he's an Can West All-Star himself for exactly that kind of reason. Trey Montour with 7 catches for 59 yards. I mean, Drew Viotto doesn't have the best day, but the thing I want to point out, 26 for 46. 46 times throwing the ball. That is not a small number. 263 yards in the air, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions is tough. But once again, you look at a Seth Hundaby-led Saskatchewan Huskies defense that was flying around the ball constantly. What they're able to do in the back end here is nothing short of amazing. Anisu Latmore, I think, has just slotted in perfectly with this defense. We already knew that he is an all-star in the making from his time at Waterloo, but just to slot in and immediately be effective, immediately be an all-star in the Can West as well, just showcases how good and how versatile he can be. And yeah, this is what I was expecting from a Saskatchewan Huskies team going into a semifinal against a UBC squad that had frankly been kind of hot and cold and struggling at times. So credit to the Huskies for taking care of business and looking damn good while doing it.
And 2 Ethan Lang interceptions doesn't hurt either. Let's go from a game that really wasn't all that close to a game that was as close as could be, moving from Saskatoon to Regina, the mayhem at Mosaic that was this other Can West semifinal. The Rams picking up the win in overtime, 32-29. First and foremost, so good to see Jackson Tuchinski back in with this club. Him obviously dealing with some injury is huge for them, and just such a testament to just what this team was capable of. You mentioned how this was the matchup last year, but roles reversed of Manitoba coming in as the presumptive favorite and these underdog Rams spoiling their parade. Well, Manitoba clearly wanted to flip the script and nearly did in this one. Regina still rolling with Sieben at quarterback. Doesn't get into the end zone, but a strong day for him nonetheless. Erickson, as you talked about, dealing with a bit of injury in this one, has a really nice couple runs early on in the day. Just such an incredible back and forth affair. So great to see where Regina opens up on the score with that Erickson run, and then Manitoba just says, all right, we're up, and Tuchinski leads his squad down the field to tie it up, back and forth through and through. I mean, what a stellar matchup this was, Tom.
Oh my goodness. You talk about everything that you're really looking for in a football game. I mean, Tuchinski, when he's operating at the highest of levels, looks so impressive. 21 for 35, 297 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Followed up with another 34 on the ground, which is very light compared to what he normally can do. But Braden Stubbs, 22 attempts for 93 himself. When this Manitoba run game is operating as well as it can with Tuchinski just ripping it in the back end, that's really where they showcase how dangerous they truly can be. And a Regina Rams squad that in that secondary in particular with Sombach, they look really impressive. Even losing a guy like Delaney Robinson last year, who was, as I was told by another Can West coach, one of, if not the best boundary corner that the entire Can West had potentially in the country. To see them still be at the top of their game in that pass defense was really incredible too. But Manitoba just looks so electric and it's so exciting as they're going here, even in the overtime minutes when they're driving and they're moving the ball seemingly at will. I think there was a number of times, especially before they got into overtime, where Manitoba had the ability to end this game and just couldn't close the door on the Rams, who ultimately obviously came away with the dub here.
Well, I mean, that secondary as well. You throw in Brandon Wong into the mix, Liam
Mhm.
Platt, who had a good year for them as well. And, realistically, we were having that conversation earlier with the day that Marshall McRae had and talking about how RSCQ, their version of that is in Éloi La Tendresse, Régime Ball. If you were to say who's AUS's guy, it's probably Justin Quirion as far as that dual threat. And clearly, as far as a guy, this ability of being able to be a dual threat, be able to keep the play alive with his feet, but still have his eyes downfield. It's Tuchinski all day. And this was the game I think I was invoking earlier on when we were talking about guys seeing in their players perhaps in their last outing for their clubs after long storied careers. And I think you confirmed that this is likely Tuchinski's last year for the Bisons. What a run it's been. Beyond heartbreaking, beyond brutal, knowing that this game ends on a missed Maya Turner field goal, one of the best Can West has had in the last however many years she's been doing it for the Bisons. I mean, at a certain point, them's the breaks. Shout out to Ty Gorniak for Regina with the clutch field goals to send it to OT and then to be able to get the two scores for them. I mean, my goodness. Again, if you didn't enjoy this game, you don't enjoy Canadian football. It had literally every element you could ask for in a Canadian game.
My favorite article title, written by one Brendan McGuire, who covers the Regina Rams. He's outstanding at what he does. Was my play-by-play guy when I was helping to call the Regina Rams game when I was out in UBC. He puts out an article saying this was the greatest football game that nobody watched because this was also at 7 p.m. during the Game 7 of the World Series. But I did have both games on, so I was able to watch and see some stuff. I liked a lot of things that we saw from Manitoba, and obviously, anytime you think of Bison's football, you think of Tuchinski, you think of Stubbs and the passing attack, or just the offense. But what Nick Pereira, linebacker for Manitoba, what he did on the day, we said how impressive it was that Jacob Baldwin finished with 11 tackles. He finished with 13, including one sack and a tackle for loss as well. Like, he was all over the field constantly, and I'm surprised that there's not more TFLs because he must have tackled a number of guys right at the line of scrimmage, if not with 1 or 2 yard gains. He just was flying around. I mean, Dario Macchia, 10 and a half tackles himself. So this was a team that was really playing some of their best football here, and especially when Marshall Erickson goes down with an injury. I mean, Christian Katende is no slouch himself. He's running the ball just as well as anybody can, and he's so difficult to take down. But when you've got guys who are rallying to the football as well as this Bison's team was doing, it's no wonder that this game was so close and had to go into overtime in order to settle it.
An absolute thriller out of Mosaic, which is where, oh, sorry, I guess that's where the Vanier is. Saskatoon will be the host site since the Huskies took out the Rams earlier in the year to maintain that top spot in Can West for a Battle of Saskatchewan Hardy Cup that, much like with that Yates Cup we have on our hands, I'm so excited to set up. Tom, let's flip coasts and head out east to talk about the action coming out of the AUS. Let's start with what the Huskies did in their matchup. Final score against Acadia, St. Mary's 31, Acadia 0. To no surprise, this defense did what they've been doing all year. My guy is very happy to know that he's a Toronto boy. I mean, an Etobicoke guy more specifically, but in Callan Edwards, I guess I need to get that right if I'm trying to claim him as one of my guys or whatnot. But he has a fumble recovery, he has an interception, he's flying all over the ball. One of the best DBs, undoubtedly, the AUS has to offer right now. Shibley does enough to able to get them on the board a few times. Their special teams units set them up well with good field position. And Malik Williams on the ground for them, as we've seen him and Liam Leggy being kind of that two-headed running back, that backfield option for them. Malik going with 111 and 2 touchdowns is all they need to be able to take care of the Axemen on this day.
Yeah, that St. Mary's defense is for real. We've said this for a number of weeks now, but they are incredible at what they do. I really was hoping to see a better performance out of Justin Shibley. 9 for 16 for 76 yards, no touchdowns and an interception. Not exactly the best outing, especially when you're going up against StFX in the Loney Bowl here. But not only Malik Williams going for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns, the on the day in total, they get 244 rushing yards against this Acadia squad. So an outstanding job by St. Mary's taking care of business here. I think the final score is 37-0 if I'm reading that correct. But this was a great dominating game from St. Mary's that's what we kind of expected here. Acadia just has been struggling so much. I mean, Nick Kennedy, 13 for 19, 57 yards, no touchdowns and 2 interceptions. That's not a shot at that young man. That is a testament to how good the St. Mary's defense is.
100%. And you're absolutely right. They're going to need a little bit more out of Shibley because the X-Men are coming back to town to take them on in Halifax. And what a thriller that was out of Antigonish. Final score, the StFX X-Men 26, the Bishop's Gators 24, StFX winning it on a Tyson Heather field goal in the waning moments of this game to give them the lead. And what a classic StFX offensive day that was for them. Fagnon goes 26 for 37, 2 touchdowns, 324 in the air. Bussy with 93 yards on 11 attempts, 1 touchdown. Ben Harrington, like, come on, brother. 8 receptions, doesn't get in the end zone, but just having that element back. Like, I know we read through some of the numbers last week. I don't have them in front of me. 8 catches in this game might be as much as he got all season for them. Devon Blackwood's been strong for them as well. You still don't see Zachary Hood. We know he's been dealing with some injury, so that's going to be a little bit of a sign to keep our eyes open for. Just strong across the board. Nice to see for Bishops as well. Quirion, not his best outing, but was able to put some stuff together. O'Shea Hosang on the ground along with Quirion kind of producing the bulk of their effects. But really a great back and forth matchup with these two teams and just a prime example of StFX had the ball last and was able to get those points to win it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you look at the similarities here between this game and the Laurier Guelph game. At halftime here, it's 23-3 for StFX, and Bishops roars back, scoring 21 points, and then ultimately StFX with that final 3-point, that field goal at the very end to win the game. That's what ends up winning it for them. But man, like in previous matchups, we saw StFX just dominate Bishops, and it looked like it was going to be the same thing in the first half. And Bishops just comes alive and shows the flashes of what made them Loney Bowl champions last year. You read off the numbers for Quirion and O'Shea Hosang, but obviously too little too late there. Love the play from Christophe Pellerin as well. 6 catches for 102 yards and 1 touchdown for those Bishop Gators. But man, the offensive production from StFX, even if it only was or primarily was in the first half, exactly like you mentioned, that's what they need if they're going to pull off this win against St. Mary's next week. Silas, Malcolm, and Ben Harrington all have to have big games. And when you've got a guy like Peyton Plesh, Devon Blackwood, Caleb Fogarty, who can also go in there and add into that passing attack, and as long as Bussy can get it done on the ground, this is where StFX is at its best and most dangerous when they're operating like this. So shout out to the X-Men getting back into the Loney Bowl, and man, they look pretty good while doing it.
And, like Caleb Fogarty is still waiting to break out as well in the backfield for them. So it's just like that's been the frustration is the immense amount of talent they have and just waiting for it all to come together. And we'll obviously set up that game next week, but it's just a huge offense versus a huge defense. It's an incredible matchup we have on our hands. And again, one that we saw 2 weeks ago, St. Mary's certainly looking like the better team. Tom, and if our guy, and I don't remember if you remember the first name, but Forsyth, the play-by-play man.
Oh, Tristan
Forsyth. we got to get you on the pod, talk a little Bishops Gators at some
Oh yeah.
point, brother. We love the energy you brought in that Loney Bowl last year, and we'd love to hear what's going on with Bishops these days, especially with the rumors that maybe they're going back to the RCQ. Who knows? But let's go to the RCQ, talk about the two semifinal matchups we had there. Let's start in Montreal, if only because don't have TVA and couldn't find this one on a stream anywhere. So don't have as many notes to talk about with this one. But final score, the Montreal Carabins 51, the Concordia Stingers 2. I mean, for Montreal, certainly nice, as you were kind of referring to last week, seeing Hassan Dosso back in there at wideout, but they were just carving them up every which way. Pepe has a good day for them. I mean, I don't really know what to say about this one, Tom. Like, it's kind of the way that we expected and everyone in the RCQ expected to go, no?
Yeah, completely. Pepe Gonzalez, 15 for 18, 258 yards and 3 touchdowns. He does that in like one half. They made sure to pull him out relatively quickly here because they didn't want to risk anything. But man, what this Montreal team can do when they're operating at on all cylinders, just looks incredible. Anton Oumet for Concordia held to 5 for 14, 82 yards, no touchdowns and 1 interception. Frank Dechembe, I really liked what we saw from him in previous games, but 8 attempts, 38 yards on the ground. This was just a suffocating Montreal defense that didn't allow anything through from Concordia, and an offense that is operating on all cylinders, especially with Hassan Dosso, Simon LaRose back in and playing some of their best football.
So let's take our talons north of Montreal up to Quebec City to look at the Laval Rouge et Or, the team that Montreal will be traveling to for the first Dussault Cup, where they took out the McGill Redbirds 47-25, a game coming out of the first quarter that had the USports landscape on fire with McGill up 14-0. Such an explosive start to the game by ELR and Co. What was the number? 68-yard run on the QB draw. Great job by the O-line in picking up the blitz, and it just parted like the Red Seas, and just La Tendresse just took off. Some really nice runs early on by Momo. Just some inside run looks, just getting a hat on a hat and allowing him with the speed and just like hard-nosed downhill running that he brings to the table to get open. And that second touchdown, where again, this was the comp in bringing up this whole discussion with McRae and with Tuchinski and with Quirion, where La Tendresse, they go empty backfield 3-by-3, and he's scrambling out, and Laval presses a little bit, and he's just able to just hit the brakes and throw a dot to his guy in Giaffre for the 21-yard touchdown. But pretty much from then on out, it's all Laval from the whole game forward. And your guy in Olivier Cool certainly had a day for the books, which included a couple plays early on where you rarely see it. And it was super windy there at Telus Stadium. So, probably plays into it where, where he's kind of just offbeat with Desjardins on a few passes, but nonetheless has an incredible outing. And it's all Laval there forward.
Yeah, when you look at the stat line here, you can be really, oh, wow, Arnaud Desjardins, 22 for 28, 356 yards and 4 touchdowns. Wow, that's incredible. Arguably more incredible, 9 catches for 150 yards and all 4 of those touchdowns. Olivier Cool just playing like a man possessed, what he was able to do. I mean, this is a Laval squad that is always going to be at the top of their game. But when Arnaud Desjardins is on complete synchronicity with the rest of his receivers, especially in Cool, man, they are a scary team to go up against here. And while you mentioned the wins in Telus Stadium probably added into why some of those drops happened, if this is a quote-unquote rough game for that, I don't want to see what a really good game looks like, because that's going to be damn near unstoppable. But loved to see McGill coming out the gates 14-0 at the end of the first quarter here and looking really good on a team that, let's not forget, does not allow people to run the ball, and to do it on the ground especially was just outstanding to see.
Well, and they did it early, and it was about all they could get because eventually that front seven for Laval just dominated the line of scrimmage, started to stunt a couple of their guys. They were bringing 5-man pressure, started to bring another 6 or so. It was almost a bit of a surprise that they were bringing as much pressure without a guy spying ELR, because again, that's how that first run happened, where as you were talking about it in the Kasari run, where yeah, if you bring pressure, you might stop them in the backfield big, but if they find that space, they're off to the races. And ELR in open space is almost impossible to catch. And so again, early on, it was almost a surprise that, not a surprise, but because they were just playing pretty simple, like zone offense, getting a hat on hat, but eventually those big dudes on the inside. And what number is he? The big dude for Laval in the middle, or I think he might be on the end a little bit in Yohan Miange, 99, where, you know, I can't really speak French, but I'm pretty sure I heard them talking about on the broadcast that he's getting some NFL looks. Obviously, they got some studs there in that linebacking core with Justin Cloutier and some of those other guys. But really nice seeing early on what they were doing. And a really cool play on the second touchdown for Laval, the first one to Olivier Cool, where they bring in Ouellette at quarterback, and about 5 yards out, kind of set up as if it's maybe going to be a QB run, and the O-line blocks down towards the boundary side to the left, and he rolls out to the right, and the whole defense kind of takes that one step in response to the O-line. He's rolling out. Cool just does a little bang route, whip route into the field, and it's just an easy play there. So, I mean, Laval, not even to say a slow start by them, just some incredibly explosive plays by an explosive offense. And, you know, again, Antonio Giaffri for McGill, big dude out there. Had to look it up because he looked like he was 6'7" out there, listed at 6'4", huge target for ELR to throw it up to. So, and also a really banged up McGill team as well. Our guy in JT Copeland-Lewis was out in this one as well. So shout out to the Redbirds for a heck of a year they had out there. You know, how else could the RCQ christen the new Dussault Cup than any matchup other than Laval and Montreal? Tom, final thoughts from any of the action in the RCQ?
Yeah, you look at both squads in Laval and Montreal, and obviously both of them having lost in the regular season. Montreal to McGill and to Laval, and Laval obviously to Montreal. These are two teams that are built for the postseason, and they are built to fight for championships. They've done it for the past number of years, and we'll have all those stats ready to go for you when we are ready to break down the preview for these games later on this week. But man, it's very rare when you have teams that operate better than what they do in the regular season than they do in the postseason. But that's a credit to both of these coaching staffs, and we are slated for a phenomenal opening Dussault Cup matchup.
It's going to be a great one. Can't wait to set that one up along with all the other matchups. Tom, final thoughts across the whole USports landscape as I quick math check. Yes, as we now are down to our final 8 teams from coast to coast in all of USports.
Ultimately, I think a lot of these games came out the way that we thought that they would. But man, if they weren't entertaining as all hell to watch, the height fight that happened out in the AUS, to see that high-scoring rock fight in Windsor, to see what happened in the double OT out with Regina and Manitoba. Like, this is slating up to be one of the most exciting USports finishes that we have had in some time now, and I cannot wait to be watching all of this.
Yeah. And you know what? It feels like we truly have, you know, with some great teams we had all year long in all these conferences. And it's obviously exciting when we see an underdog make it into one of these games. It truly feels like these conferences have the best teams they have to offer right now, which is going to make that conference championship week. Can't miss action. Get yourself to one of these games or have your face glued to your computer screen, or if you live in Quebec and you have TVA, you get to luckily watch it on your television set. Keep your ears and eyes peeled for what our setup is going to be in Waterloo for the Yates Cup. We will be there undoubtedly. What the nature of our game day live will be, we'll let you know a little bit later on this week right here at the 55.